Hey there, welcome to another edition of Cambridge Inside Out. My name is Robert Winters.
I'm Judy Nathans.
And today's October 17th.
Yes, and
correct?
our October surprise, no,
It's no surprise.
we have a guest.
David Weinstein.
Hi, David Weinstein. I'm running for school committee in Cambridge.
That's right.
Why don't you just tell the folks a little bit about yourself, about your background, how you sort of came to do this crazy thing.
Well, I'm a second-time candidate, so some of you met me a couple of years ago, some of you have met me this time around. I've lived in Cambridge 16 years now, but I've been engaged with education my entire life. Obviously, as a student in public schools that were actually similarly diverse to Cambridge. It's part of what drew me to Cambridge. A much smaller community I grew up in. Greenburgh, New York. It's near White Plains, just north of the city. And that was a very important experience for me, and I later taught in those schools and in schools in Massachusetts, both outside of Boston and in Boston. The commitment I've had to public education is really what draws me to run and to run it for a second time. The first experience, obviously it was disappointing not to actually win a spot, but I really do feel that not only did I have an opportunity to, be a part of an important discussion, but I felt that I got to know the city even better. Though, as I say, I've been living in Cambridge now 16 years.
And your children are in the schools.
And my children are in the schools, and that is probably the deciding factor for running now, as opposed to, 3 or 4 years ago, or waiting a few more years. I have a son in kindergarten, and he was in junior kindergarten last year, and a daughter in 5th grade, which means that for the bulk of this coming school committee term, she'll be in the upper school.
Right.
So
So
elementary and upper school. Yeah, and I think that's an important perspective and to be living that and have that on the school committee. I think that we have, this I guess goes beyond, kind of who I am, but the school committee as a whole, generally it includes a range of perspectives, a range of experiences, and I think that the perspectives and experiences and skills that I bring would complement the other people on that committee and lead it to be more effective.
And I would point out also is, in an ideal world, isn't that what proportional representation is supposed to do? It's actually, get a good representation of everyone. Sometimes I worry that the school committee elections take a little bit of a back seat in terms of attention to the city council, and I think that's a shame because what is it, about a third of the budget for the city is public schools? It's pretty significant.
Well, it's a substantial amount, and obviously it makes a major impact on families with and others with children in the schools. But I think that there's pretty wide recognition, certainly in Cambridge, that the impact that our schools have on the city as a whole. In many respects. And actually one goal I have, which doesn't necessarily come up a lot in the candidate forums, but one of my goals is for school committee and city council to work together a little bit more. I mean, there are a few kind of formal opportunities, budget approval and things like that. There was an early education roundtable just last week or a few days ago. Everything blurs together for me. I've been knocking on a lot of doors, so I remember a lot of individual faces and conversations, but I couldn't tell you exactly what day they happened. But I think that kind of forum is important, but also really recognizing the way that even housing relates to
everything does.
relates to education and job opportunities and income inequality and all these issues. And I don't, as a school committee member, plan to broaden my focus so much that we're not getting things done. I just think it's important to recognize that all of these things interact, and we're going to be more effective with what we're doing in the schools if this is happening, in coordination with the city council. And I've gotten a great chance not only to meet the other school committee candidates, but to meet the city council candidates more than probably a lot of people do.
Some of them have served on the school committee.
It's
Mark and Denise, I think.
Yes.
Denise Simmons, Mark McGovern, Tim Toomey, David Marr.
Of course, David Marr is stepping down now, but it's true.
But all four have served on the school committee at one point.
So it's actually, it's a nice effect.
And if Richard Harding gets in, he would have recently served on it. So that's actually a plus.
Actually, speaking of, you're talking about job opportunities and the possibilities of having more collaboration. What's the common ground between city council and school committee? one perfect illustration of the fact that they are so tightly intertwined was a discussion they had in the last term about STEAM and STEM. It was largely kicked off by this discussion of the Foundry building in East Cambridge. And they were going to try to sort of solve the whole problem of job preparation for the future here by doing it without the involvement of the schools. And I thought to myself, well, let's see, we're talking about STEM, science, technology, was it engineering, math, and the arts, whatever. But it was city councilors basically working, trying to plan it all out. I think, aren't we missing a little something here?
Well, I think that, as I was saying, even within the school committee, having that range of perspectives is important. And I know those city councilors brought important perspectives to it and important levers for change, right? Yeah. And even within the school committee, one of the reasons I'm running is I have substantial classroom experience. I taught for 5 years. Primarily I taught high school English, but I did student teaching and teaching in art, K through 12. So I've really spent time in the full range of classes. Plus I worked in a camp for children with special learning needs. I substitute taught for several months at the New York School for the Deaf. I mean, really a range of those kinds of classroom-focused experiences, and did a full teacher preparation program, and master's in education at Harvard Grad School of Ed, where I was focused in particular on school structures and teacher leadership, as well as classroom teaching.
And when was that?
I finished that program in 2001. I did it over 2 years, that was around the time actually I came to Cambridge. In fact, I was doing that program before I moved to Cambridge. So it's really been 18 years that I've been, figuring out how to get around these streets. And I'm almost there. Yeah. I'm almost there.
But you sort of live in a cul-de-sac, though, right? Well, so that makes it a little more difficult.
It's an art, and what I feel like I finally have a handle on is those rotaries over there by Fresh Pond. I thought I had a handle on them before, and my wife kept saying you're doing it wrong, and finally I actually looked it up, and I was doing it wrong. So now I'm doing it right, but there's still people to yell at who are doing it wrong in my head.
You were going clockwise around them. And then everybody kept honking at you, right?
I mean, guidelines, rules.
Yeah.
I've spent my life driving in either New York or Massachusetts, so.
Very different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And no.
Yeah.
But I do think that education classroom perspective is really important, and I really appreciate the other experiences in education that are represented amongst the candidates and amongst the current school committee. Because some of them were in the
classroom recently.
Yes, but and there's people who have done guidance and reading specialists and substitute teaching and working with after-school programs. Nobody who's been that full-time classroom teacher over that duration of time. And I just think that so much of the policy that school committee is responsible for evaluating, for setting, it comes down to what happens in the classroom. And also having an understanding of that reality for the educators, the excellent educators we have in the district. And even realizing that those, even though I had a number of those classroom experiences, that they're still only only what they were. I mean, for me, growing up in and teaching in communities that were similarly diverse, that had a real commitment to equity and outcome, is, I think, a leg up in understanding what's happening in Cambridge. It's part of what drew me to Cambridge. I wanted my kids to grow up in a community like that. And it was what I wanted to subject myself to again, because it is challenging. It is certainly challenging. But I mean, I don't know if have either of you had the experience of going to a school committee meeting and feeling really excited and energized?
No. No, actually, something, for the longest time when I didn't go, I'm mainly sort of a city council guy, right? Okay. But I did for a while try and go to school committee meetings, and they almost sort of speak their own language, It's like a little edu-speak, which is a little off-putting if you're not sort of part of the club.
Yeah.
That's a little strange. And they often, because I teach for a living, I always found it amazing what a high percentage of the discussion had to do with things that had nothing specifically to do with education. It had to do with the peripheral stuff about the buildings or, just basically everything else. I think I once said, hey, could we just have a discussion about how we do mathematics education in the school system? And that was like a sort of a real departure.
Well, and if you're going to have that discussion, which is important, it's important to bring the voices of the educators in there. And if the educators that we have in our district are not voices we feel we can bring into that conversation, then we've done something wrong. They should be the voices that we respect, and that we are people of excellent educators that we've brought in, that we've given opportunities for mentorship and coaching and development, so that over their careers they continue to grow and be leaders in what they're doing, both within their schools and within the community. And then we need to bring those voices in and listen to those voices and understand. And it is important to know the jargon and the edge speak and all that, but it's important to communicate. And the reason I ask if you've ever been excited going to one of those meetings is that I am excited at those meetings and watching those meetings. And so there's only one cure for that, I think, which is to actually run for the committee.
Let me ask you, you said you've knocked on a lot of doors. Is there any common thread or theme of the people that you've talked to? Complaints or whatever?
I mean, there's, you hear different things. I mean, it speaks to the diversity and complexity of the community. Right. And I don't mean just diversity in terms of, ethnic and racial and economic diversity, but just, every kid is different too. Sure. So anybody I speak with who has a child who is in Cambridge schools or has gone through Cambridge schools, has their own perspective on it. Mm-hmm. But, it really highlights the range of experiences, the range of children that we need to address. So, it's honestly, it sounds like a platitude to say, all children, children. Right. But it is really the work of the public schools is to serve all children. Right. That doesn't mean you do one thing. It means you do whatever you need to do to support each child, and their experiences are different, and the needs of our individual schools are different. They're each doing, they're, in some cases the approach is, different that a school is taking, whether it's bilingual or more of a, project-based or expeditionary learning approach, or in other cases, even with controlled choice, there are differences in terms of the populations overall in different schools, and, the needs any given year in any given classroom are different.
Did you teach when you did teaching, was it K to 8 schools, or were they junior highs? I mean, what is your feeling with the upper school?
Well, I taught in a few different settings. I taught in, standalone 9 through 12 settings.
High school,
I also taught at school I went to, was 7 through 12 in one building, and and then they kind of separated out 7 to 8 as ostensibly a middle school. Yeah. And I've been in elementary schools that ran right through
Any
5th grade.
Any opinions on how that all works?
This came up in a forum yesterday too, and actually somebody asked. Asked all of the candidates.
Fuller,
yes, Margaret Fuller House Forum, which was really terrific, and Representative Decker, it was. CCTV was there doing a great job. And,
all right, so catch it.
Representative Decker was moderating and did a great job, and we had a lot.
One right now for City Council at Margaret Fuller too.
Yes, right.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Yeah, this evening. Right. So I recommend that as soon as this is over, run over there or change the channel or whatever. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Because and I don't think Margaret is moderating tonight, but they had enough time for, even with 12 of us, for us to go into in depth a little bit more than is possible in a lot of the settings. I mean, everybody's doing their best in terms of formats, and you need to give everybody equal time, but it's challenging. But the reason I bring it up is that question came up.
Okay.
Would we support going back to K through 5? What do we think of the thing? And really, there was no support for going back.
K to 8.
K to 8. Sorry, K to 8.
Yeah.
And there was really no support for that. And frankly, I think it's kind of a moot point at this point.
I know.
I wouldn't want to spend my energy on that. Our schools are getting well established, and you can argue about how well that transition was managed, but it's happened, and now we need to look at the current situation. And I think there's definitely room to improve. I think we're doing a better and better job at those upper schools. I had experience being in a newly formed school, and they are still newly formed schools. And so helping to make sure that they're really establishing strong school cultures, that the leadership has the support that they need, that the educators do, and that even now, 5 years later, that we have the best of what was happening in grades 6 through 8 happening in these schools. And even if some continuity has been lost over that time, it is certainly not too late to say, hey, as a community, there are certain things that maybe got lost in that transition that we want to reclaim. And there are other opportunities now that we didn't have before. I mean, the goal of having this, in part of having this critical mass of students in each of these buildings to be able to do more for them as individuals, as a group,
This was the upper school model.
The upper
Right.
school model, yeah, it is
But
important.
I guess there's a complaint about some of the schools are not doing as well as others, but I'm wondering if it's just the same old problems where it's demographics or it's who chooses, I don't know.
Well,
You don't really choose your upper school though, right? You're assigned to that.
well, you feed into them
You're
from
fed into
your
it from your, the
from-
ones that you didn't choose theoretically.
right. The whatever, however you ended up in your elementary
Right.
school, that's
Right.
where you feed
Okay.
in. And I suppose there, I don't know for certain, but I
Theoretically, it
suppose
should be
theoretically, you can,
democratic, yeah.
whether you can
Whatever.
move around. But I think
Yeah.
it makes sense to
Yeah.
to in general flow together that way, because you can also plan that transition.
Sure.
And I think the transition to high school then is also really important.
Right.
Yeah.
So all that, I think there's always room for improvement on that kind of coordination. I sense
Yeah.
that that's an issue. I do think that we should have family liaisons at the middle schools, the upper schools.
Do
We don't
not
have
those
them?
done?
We don't. I think
They
it's
had them in the K to 8.
yeah, and they still
Sure.
do in the elementary schools, although not full time. And I think that is something
Oh, I
that
didn't
we
realize
should
that,
also
'cause
explore.
I've seen that mentioned, I think, wait a minute, I thought they had them.
Yeah,
I
no, they
didn't
do
know
not.
that.
And
Yeah, that's important.
it is important. I mean, the need for family engagement does not go away
Exactly.
in grades 6 through
More
8.
so when they get to be that age.
Yeah, I remember, despite
Yeah.
myself, I remember being that age, and it's not an easy time. So there's a lot that we need to
Yeah.
do, and that's a
Yeah.
very straightforward thing.
Sure.
And family liaisons, I think there's been more of a move with the current superintendent, and I would support doing more in this regard to really bring together family liaisons to really look at what are our goals
Yeah.
as a group for this structure and for these individuals. What are they bringing to the table? I was talking with one of the family liaisons the other day who was pointing out the role that they have in connecting students with services outside of the school, like Cambridge Youth Soccer and the potential for
Right.
scholarships there. There's even housing and food issues, and whether or not we have a funding model where some of that funding comes directly from the city. I mean, of course, the school budget is from the city.
Right.
I think that family liaison model is a real strength, and we can leverage that to be even more effective. And even just on the simplest level of a contact person that you
Right.
can call,
Yeah.
so you're not. Even though we have these wonderful, people working at the front desks, I hate to say
Different.
secretary because it never
No,
feels
you're
it's not
right.
the right title or
They're
or
customer- no,
doesn't have the
I-
right connotation. I know that
Yeah.
Cheryl, my neighbor actually, and our secretary, at Granite Park is incredible, and secretary. It doesn't
know.
do it
Yeah,
justice.
right, yeah.
The principal,
Yeah.
having to just call those folks.
Sure.
Maybe those are the people you need to speak to ultimately,
Yeah.
but somebody who can, but also make those connections to the city, who can be kind of keeping an eye and connecting with teachers and again, forming that liaison
Now, would
function.
that fold into like guidance counselors, more guidance, like at the high school?
I
To
do-
me, in a sense, they're related.
They are related,
You know,
yeah.
and,
I mean, guidance counselors have a specific kind of expertise and portfolio that's a little different in terms of,
Right, but
supporting
getting
academically.
kids connect- I
In this,
heard-
in this system, because I
Yeah.
went to school in New York, and I think we never had a term like family liaison. We always
Right.
had just guidance counselors,
Yeah.
and they sort of performed that
Right.
role. So.
I actually don't know how many districts have that role.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it might be fairly unique to
What-
Cambridge,
what
the
family
family
liaisons?
liaisons. But I do think it's, it's important.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned something because there is this sort of crossover. There's the school system, and then there's the Department of Human Services programs. We have after-school programs in school buildings, but it's all managed through the Human Services Department, not the schools, right? And then I have a role basically as a family liaison who's connecting students and their families into social service programs, which are part of Human Services programs. So that's a pretty tight partnership, or at least ideally it must be.
Yeah, and I think we have so many, resources in Cambridge, including, of course, the universities, the colleges and universities.
But someone has to
private,
connect this
industries,
person to that resource, and that's maybe where it falls apart.
And I'll bring up another skill that I think I bring
Yeah.
to the table here.
Okay.
I am a parent in the middle of things. I am an experienced educator
Right.
who's looked at it from the classroom
Right.
perspective, from the policy
Right.
perspective. But I also have been working for 15 years now in nonprofits and higher ed in communications in many different ways. And I think communications are not just kind of an add-on; they're really integral to moving things forward. We have so much in this city, and we have so much goodwill, I think, actually, so much passion and goodwill toward the schools. Even the voices that I would say at first might seem the most critical
Yeah.
are really, in my experience, and this would include, by the way, knocking on doors, right?
Right.
Are the people with the most goodwill toward the schools. They're the people who, feel most strongly about what the potential of our schools is and what it can be. And even the people whose own experience going through that system, either themselves or their children, even when they see it falling short, they're the people who are most passionate about moving it forward, I think, as much as anybody else anyway.
Probably met my ex on the trail. He was very passionate and critical. He didn't like the change to the upper school.
Well, there's kind of a, what's the phrase? There's kind of a confidentiality of the canvassing, I don't... People reveal a lot of, important information. I take it into account, but, I don't reveal it on live TV.
Oh, of course not.
But, so I may or may not have spoken. They may or may not have said those things. They confirm or deny it. But I think the communication is, or communications breakdown is where we often lose some of that, energy. And this includes, by the way, when our own educators come to the school committee and with concerns, with proposals, with basically reporting on what their experience is. Now, I know that. The educators in our district don't come to the committee assuming or expecting that school committee members will, rubber stamp whatever suggestions they make, but they rightly, I think, assume and expect that that feedback will be taken into account. And the same with parents. And actually the school committee also, I believe, has an obligation to actively go out and using a number of different strategies and solicit that information because
that's come up a lot.
Yeah, I mean it seems obvious, but it's important because the people who do come or literally come to school committee meetings, they should be heard. The people who don't or can't should also be heard.
Committee meetings?
There is.
At the beginning of every meeting, there's public comment.
It's very structured. They also have the comments from the student school committee members as part of the whole program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people come on a typical meeting. I remember in years past, if there was some big hot button thing or it was budget time and people would start packing it. And there are other times it was empty.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no typical meeting. I think it really depends on, what's on the agenda or whether people have been mobilizing around a particular issue.
Right.
But I think that regardless of whether people are, on their own mobilizing around something, I think that the school committee's role is to be looking at what are the realities in the schools, where are we falling short? How do we address it? And there's no way to address it well without really engaging with all the stakeholders, which includes the educators, which includes the families, which includes community members at large. It's a kind of a personal pet peeve is I think we often forget about people in the community who don't have kids in the schools. But also have a lot to offer, and have a stake in what happens in our schools. And so, I can't imagine like a better time for me to run and, be a part of this school committee because I see the need to have, in addition to people whose children are about to enter or have gone through the school system, to have somebody whose children are right there in the school system. In addition to people with, experience on the school committee or with experience in other ways in the schools, that classroom teacher perspective to really understand and kind of get that at a, gut level. And to somebody who's coming in with skills, but with that experience, but with fresh eyes, and looking at what we're doing and how we're communicating what we're about, and how at a meeting even we can both. First of all, I believe we should have all the meetings recorded, and we should have,
they're not?
They're not. There are these roundtable meetings that are not.
I think that's...
Well, the original idea was sort of a let your hair down thing, but I don't know if that's really worked out.
I'm not sure that anybody ever lets their hair down in a different way, and they are appropriately open meetings, so they can be recorded, and they are recorded.
I think they're
so why not just do it officially?
Yeah,
right?
I think they are going to be from here on. They seem to. The last two have been, so.
But I think we can do better in all of those respects in terms of that kind of, communication. But I am committed to moving things forward, and in a realistic way. I know that we're not going to accomplish everything we'd like to accomplish in the next 2 years.
Pre-K.
Well, but junior kindergarten for all 4-year-olds, I think we can do in relatively short order, and then we move on to the preschool. And I think I say it sequentially, but I actually don't think it's sequential in that sense. I think we need to be planning ahead. So it's this combination that I've been talking about a lot of, acting with a sense of urgency, but also with the long view, because kids only get one shot at it. And as I
Right.
said, I've got a kindergartner and a fifth grader, and that fifth grader, it seems like she was in kindergarten just yesterday.
Yeah.
She'll be in upper school next year. She'll be graduating before I know it. And she and
Yeah.
her peers, including peers who, need much more from the schools
Sure.
than at least right now I think my daughter needs.
Right.
That's their shot. So I don't feel like it's unconscionable. It would be unconscionable for me to say, all right, well, let's take our time. However, we cannot be reckless, and we can't just do things in this kind of like, well, let's act quickly, without considering, what's the
long
next
run.
step?
Right, yeah.
What are we building towards?
Right.
What have we been doing? And start making as you go, make those course corrections, have an overall vision, always subject to change.
Sure.
But have that vision. And I think with a new superintendent, with a strategic plan framework, this is a time when we're going to be kind of where the rubber meets the road with that framework. What are we actually going to do?
Yeah.
Are we going to really involve our educators in this process? Are we going to make sure that we lift up wonderful things already happening? And look critically at which things maybe need to be scrapped. That happens too. The initiative fatigue that people are bringing up rightly happens, I think, when you're not making those decisions, but just putting another thing and another thing and another thing, or where people don't see a process that says, all right, we're switching because this has run its course, we've done what we can, this won't work the way we thought it would.
I think they need to do more also. I mean, my child is now 30, so she went through the public schools, but I am not truthfully as involved. I know we don't have much time, but anyway, they need to do more things to bring in the whole community. Advertise their great dramas, their theater, things like that. Anyway, you get the last.
It's even hard to get a Falcons t-shirt. I got one the other day at the high
I went to
school.
all the games, CRLS.
You didn't get me one?
No.
All right, David, you got 30 seconds to make a
seconds.
pitch for why they
forgot
should
about
give you
that.
their number one vote.
Well, it will take your number one votes for me to get on there and for me to round out this school committee.
Right.
Realistically speaking, a number of the people on the school committee will be reelected, and I think that, there's a lot of great experience and a lot of great skills members on there bring. And I think that I will bring something new to that school committee that we don't currently have. The communications expertise, the program management, a teacher, a parent.
All right.
There we go.
There you go.
That's it.
All right, well,
Yay, okay.
we'll be back in a few minutes.
Another 10
Cambridge
seconds,
InsideOut.
20 more things.
Yeah.